I'm Christopher Lydon, and this is Open Source, in a sort of watch party for a season when World Cup soccer, championship basketball, sports of every kind, all seem to run deeper, more believable, much better played than the rest of our lives, more memorable than our politics, surely more honest and closer to our ideals as human beings, not just Americans. We're sampling the global sports mania on its home ground in Boston with the encyclopedic Richard Johnson, founder and longtime curator of the New England Sports Museum, which is spread out on the walls inside this second tier of the Boston Garden. We can look down, Richard, to the ice that Bobby Orr skated on for the Boston Bruins and the parquet floor over that ice that Bill Russell and Larry Bird bounced basketballs on for the Celtics. We can also see those championship banners in green and white. Bill Russell won 11 of them in 13 years. It takes the breath away. Let's walk around the museum, Richard, and give us a sample of your own kind of emotional highlights.
The action is fast and furious when the Boston Bruins tangle with the Detroit Red Wings in the final game of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Bostonians have won 3 games and now are on their way to make it 4 straight, and they mean business.
There's actually parts of the 3rd floor in this building where you can stand quietly and feel a slight vibration of trains coming in and out of North Station. Wow. The garden literally has a heartbeat. It's the beating heart of metropolitan Boston. It's right here.
Larry Bird was famous for knowing the soft spots, the vibrations inside that parquet floor. He might have felt it.
Oh, I think he probably did. I remember Milt Schmidt told me he could feel the vibration in the ice while standing for the national anthem.
In short, the place is alive, down to the roots.
It literally has an aura. I love the fact that we pay homage to competitors such as Kevin Garnett, John Havlicek, Bill Russell, Derek White, Al Horford. We're blessed in Boston. Not only are we the Hollywood of sports, we're the Paris of sports, too. There's a certain artistry and transcendence to the glories that we've achieved here and that we've cheered for and been a part of. This is a mural honoring the great Celtics teams of the 1980s, including Larry Bird and Dennis Johnson, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and my friend Bill Walton, another transcendent team. One of the links in the dynasty chain that we have here. 18 world championships, most in NBA history. We're very proud of that. We're looking at a picture of Larry Siegfried, I'm guessing at around 1968 or 9, post-game, holding a can of beer, a lit cigarette, and he is visibly bleeding from both knees. That sort of sums up the work ethic of those teams. Here was a dynasty who held most of their practices at the Cambridge YMCA. Toward the end of his life, Bill Russell was asked whether he thought he might go to heaven. And he laughed in that great cackle of his. He said, I've already been to heaven. He said, playing for the Celtics with the group of gentlemen that he competed with, to him was heaven on earth. And for those of us that got to witness it, an emphatic yes. We have Sir Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, on the night before his election in 1960, the Globetrotters, the circus, the Beanpot, our annual collegiate hockey fest. We also have any number of artifacts and jerseys and trophies and posters and whatnot. Not only is it the visuals of what actually is transpiring, the ballet of a great catch or great pass, but it's numbers. So one that's very significant is 198. That was the draft number of a certain Tom Brady in the 2000 NFL draft. And he does not let anyone forget that. So the 2 numbers for him are 7 Super Bowl trophies shining at the top of that mountain, but also 198, the bottom of the barrel, and he more than proved himself, didn't he? Basically, we try to cover the waterfront of what I consider to be the greatest sports community on the planet, Greater Boston and New England.
5 seconds left. Boston only has a 1-point lead.
Greer's putting the ball on a play. He gets it out deep, and Havlicek steals it. Over the
Mind, body, and spirit. What happens to us, Rich Johnson, in this sports world? Something more than excitement at the skill and the competitive striving we're looking at. For example, in front of that huge black and white portrait of Bill Russell in Game Time, and it stopped both of us short.
Here he is sitting in his days as player-coach with his warm-up draped across his knees after having played, but also surveying the court, deciding what decisions to make for yet another victory. He is the lord of his realm. No greater champion in North American team sports, both as a player, as a coach. With the Celtics, the record stands alone. 11 world championships and 13 seasons played. He was a two-time NCAA champion, an Olympic champion, and a social justice warrior at the same time. A remarkable combination of leadership skills, competitive fire, and just a wonderful heart and a wonderful soul, and a person who absolutely left things better than he found them.
It's your general theory, Richard Johnson, that that's the thing about sports. It is the gateway to social change, emotional change, human change, cultural change, over and over again. Title IX, for example, congressional enactment that has changed sports world, but has changed the lives of every woman in our country.
What's interesting about Title IX is the law does not mention sports at all. There's not a single word that refers to sports, yet because of the nature of that law, because the nature of it ensuring that government money would only go to those institutions offering programs, including sports, equally based on gender, it opened up a world of competitive opportunities for women that has utterly changed the landscape of global sports, because our women's teams, especially in sports like soccer and basketball, have led the way. You know, we had always been preeminent in track and field, but in every other sporting category, gymnastics, it has absolutely opened a flood tide of opportunity for young women. And I think it's the greatest landmark in certainly North American sports history since Jackie Robinson broke the color line with the Dodgers.
The WNBA Basketball League and now the PWHL Hockey League are both moneymakers. The fan bases are growing by leaps and bounds, and the women in those worlds, the Williams sisters, the skier Michaela Schifrin, Caitlin Clark, so many more. The novelist Jonathan Lethem contributed this graph to the New York Review of Books on the sudden champion Knicks superstar and MVP Jalen Brunson. Lethem wrote, a few moments before he mounted the stage to join his teammates, immediately after clenching his father, mother, and wife in a series of deep hugs, Jalen Brunson was pulled into a one-on-one interview with the reporter Lisa Salters, who caught him in a relatively unguarded moment. Holy shit, he began, and then he stopped. I got no words. But then he found a few. I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm in awe, he said. I don't know. When Salters asked about his willful drive in carrying his team to the finish line, Brunson stumbled his way to this declaration. He said, whenever I had the ball, I'm just thinking about me alone in the gym. I love that. What are you and I thinking in this sort of goosebump sports sphere?
Well, all great champions imagine these moments before they occur, and they make the commitment and put in the time. You know, there's the whole notion of the 10,000 hours. Okay, well, that's done. And I've seen it personally here in Boston. Kevin Garnett, you know, bringing in Ubuntu, the spirit of communal drive, of fellowship, of brotherhood. I saw him a number of times working out on game days in the mid to late afternoon on days where he had a game at 7:30 that night. It was routine for him. It harkens back to Larry Bird, who did the same thing. These people are different. And I could tell you some other stories about how competitive people are. Even in an innocent game of ping pong, long after Dave Cowens retired, I remember him taking his sport coat off after losing the first game of ping pong and then proclaiming 2 out of 3. It's a spirit that translates itself and results in all those banners hanging from the rafters.
You reminded me, Rich, of Orwell's line that in a lot of sports, we're looking at war without bullets. I'm looking at all of this for the current of feeling between the teammates, notably the incredible assurance about winning that Jalen Brunson fed to the Knicks. Also his uncanny confidence that spooked the San Antonio Spurs. I'm thinking about the history in all of these people's heads, that the Knicks had gone 50 years without the title, or the contrary, that Bill Russell's Celtics were almost never without a title. They're all in the grip of tradition and expectation and their identities at stake every time they play.
Context is everything. So when an athlete arrives in Boston, there's an expectation of performing in a certain manner. If you're a Bruin, grit and determination are right at the head of that list. And it's no surprise the team president is Cam Neely. No one epitomized that more than he did. With the Celtics, at their practice gym, they have the 18 championship banners. They have a 19th banner. That is their destiny. That's what they're there for, to place the lettering on that. And Lord, the Patriots, who I remember as the downtrodden AFL franchise that I first went to visit at Boston College in 1969, I am still sort of stunned to see those 6 Super Bowl championship banners at Gillette Stadium. How'd that happen? Well, we know how that happened, but it's still, it's something to delight in that. And of course, the Red Sox, maybe above and beyond anything, we're a hockey and a baseball town. And Fenway Park is still, one of the twin beating hearts in urban Boston, along with TD Garden, that Fenway Park has become the most visited tourist attraction in Boston. No surprise that, because we're looking at a diamond that was graced at one point by the likes of Babe Ruth and Tris Speaker and Ted Williams and Carl Yastrzemski. There's a wonderful continuity to it all, and it's all reachable physically. You just have to get on a subway. Other than Gillette Stadium, you're right in the heart of things here. And if you decide to go on foot, you'll be walking across the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
Funny that the contagion goes between sports, too. Larry Bird said that people wondered when he was looking into the rafters during the national anthem, what was he thinking? And he said, I'm not thinking about those rafters or those banners. I'm looking at Bobby Orr's retired number 4 and thinking, what the hell can I learn from that?
Well, he was basically looking at the paragon of achievement, of teamwork, leadership. This is one who was not familiar with hockey. I'm sure they had to explain offsides to him and icing, but that didn't matter. It was Bobby Orr, the person. It was Bobby Orr, the citizen, that inspired that gaze skyward.
The great writers in sports, and we've got to talk about writers, often saw unspoken layers and agendas in all this. The great C.L.R. James was a black man out of the Caribbean who played cricket and covered the sport for the Manchester Guardian. Cricket was one theater of the colonial imperial drama when the British Empire was in decline. The beauty of cricket, the game, C.L.R. James said, was that it was the Brits' game, obviously, but it allowed the colonies to beat the empire at their own game. In Trinidad, in India, in Australia eventually. Not only to beat them, but to play the game their own way. Add style, color, finesse. It's funny, I was watching this week in the World Cup on City Hall Plaza, just up the street in Boston, when the great Spain and the tiny Cape Verde played to a scoreless tie for 90 minutes. In that crowd of mostly black Cape Verdean Americans, and I've known them all my life, it was a big moral victory for the ex-colonials. In spirit, they won. At the end of the scoreless tie, they were rejoicing. It was a beautiful thing to watch.
Well, we'll cue George Orwell on that. It's not always war without bullets. Sometimes there are these moments of grace, grandeur that are truly unforgettable and that people will hold close to their hearts for ever. And certainly in the professional sphere here, a victory over a vaunted rival, such as the Red Sox victory in 2004 over the Yankees against all odds when they were down 3-0 and coming back and winning the way they did, with David Ortiz leading the parade. Those are moments that last forever in the hearts and minds of fans. You go into any bar room in New England and there'll be a picture of Jason Varitek giving a face wash to A-Rod in a game that was played earlier that historic season. These are moments. These are communal totems that we hold dear.
That's a new phenomenon in American life. This summer, the watch party. New York had official ones, unofficial ones. The New Yorker and the New York Times celebrated them, marked them. This is a new what? I was at one yesterday and feeling, I don't know what. I've been in that spot. It's right between Boston City Hall and the John F. Kennedy Federal Building, and it was alive in a way I'd never seen it before.
The watch parties are a great phenomenon, and they sort of hearken a little bit to the victory parades, of course. But the watch parties are great because, again, Boston as a port city, as a destination for people from all different cultures, the fact that the world has come to America for this largest World Cup ever with 48 teams, there are any number of reasons for people you might not ever meet in any other context. You will be there sharing a beer or a handshake or a hug in a moment of transcendence for a citizen or an immigrant from Cape Verde or Haiti. It's something to behold. It's a wonderful thing because the tickets to the games themselves are very expensive. So there's an exclusivity to that is beyond most people's means. But putting on your shorts and your sandals and going to a watch party is available to everybody, and it's a grand thing. It's a wonderful spectacle.
At the soccer in City Hall Plaza, I was talking to a guy named Michael from Cape Verde, lives in Brockton, Massachusetts. I said, you're aware, of course, Marvin Hagler, the champion boxer, and before him, Rocky Marciano were identified. They were Brockton, Massachusetts, and of course he knew it all. Back to this general question, very general question of what is this sports thing? John McPhee, marvelous writer, wrote maybe the best book ever on tennis called Levels of the Game, reconstructing stroke by stroke. They sat both players down in front of a TV set and spoke of what they were thinking at this particular moment. It was between Clark Graebner, son of a white dentist from Cleveland, and the upward bound Arthur Ashe from Richmond, Virginia. Graebner, said McPhee, was playing with a Republican attitude, facing a Democratic mind in the same game. It was incredible piecing out of the action, or so it looked to John McPhee. What do we make of that?
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. I have often compared the National League of the 50s and 60s to the Democratic Party, and the American League at that point to the Republican Party, because the National League was the party of Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, Don Newcomb, Maury Wills, and the American League was the league of Mickey Mantle, Rocky Colavito. There was a marked contrast, and of course that only changed when Frank Robinson was traded from the Reds to the Orioles, which basically represented a sea change in the culture of that league. But yeah, there certainly are ripples of a sort of political culture in the games that we watch, no doubt.
Definitely. I grew up with it in Boston. My older brother Peter was a great Red Sox fan when they won the pennant, lost the series in 1946. Ted Williams, he wrote in this beautiful scrapbook he kept about the whole team. Under the picture of Ted Williams, Peter had written, team's best long ball hitter. I fell in love with the Boston Braves 1948. They finally had a black player, Sam Jethro, who had been rejected by the Red Sox. But to my mind, they were Democrats playing for the Braves. And Vern Stevens, incredibly white characters like that on the Red Sox was something Republican. But come back to the writers, Richard, your favorites. And I've got my own. I remember one time I was applied to Portsmouth Priory, a school in Rhode Island, and they asked for me to list 7 books I had read in the last year. And I wrote, I've read one book 7 times. It was Lucky to Be a Yankee by Joe DiMaggio. And eventually I got my own signed copy. But what were your favorites? The ones you read over and over, the way we read John R. Tunis's Young Razzle. But the grown-up ones like David Halberstam.
I can tell you that the sports books that captivated me from the beginning were first Larry Ritter's Glory of Their Times. He went around in the early 60s with a tape recorder and tape recorded major league players from the early 1900s. So he talked to Rube Marquard, Smokey Joe Wood, any number of other stars, and it was a remarkable accounting. It was very much like the WPA recordings of the blues artists during the 30s. You know, we were given a window into a world that seemed so distant. Of course, really not now. That book was written only 50 years after these achievements, but they're talking about Ty Cobb and Joe Jackson and that world. Then I jumped to Roger Angell and his fabulous essays for The New Yorker on baseball, you know, written from the perspective of a fan, but so insightful, so artfully wrought. Then I jumped to The Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn, who, of course, had covered the Brooklyn Dodgers of the 50s as a reporter, but then made a visit to them all 30 years after their achievements as really a dynasty in the National League, one that always was up against the Yankees of Casey Stengel. But the personal stories, you know, Carl Erskine and the care of his son, Carl Furillo, the hard hat that helped build the World Trade Center, Jackie Robinson, who only lived to be 53, and really all that he had gone through to become the iconic figure that he became. You know, it wasn't just the competitive achievements on the field, but it was just enduring, especially the first 3 years of his career, all that he was expected to endure to be able to burst those doors open. Then I jumped to athlete memoirs, Ken Dryden's book, The Game. I reread it every 5 years. It's that good. Bill Russell's memoir, Second Wind, every bit as compelling and engaging as having watched him play. So those are certainly a few of the books in my library. And then I have to mention the great anthologies, the fireside books of baseball, football, horse racing. Just fabulous, especially the baseball versions, all 4 of them edited by the great Charles Einstein. And then you move on to the Library of America, which has compiled marvelous anthologies of baseball, football, basketball, boxing, all very much worth a look. And then they've also compiled anthologies of the writing of the great Red Smith and W.C. Hines. They belong in that pantheon of the Library of America. They're every bit as worthy as any of the novels or plays or other publications in that series.
Funny, I brought with me to the garden Second Wind, Bill Russell's memoirs with Taylor Branch. And I know what you mean about Ken Dryden's book, The Game. Ken Dryden, the Cornell-educated, Ralph Nader-trained lawyer who was the goalie for how many Stanley Cup winners in Montreal?
71, 73, 76, 6 Stanley Cup championship trophies in his trophy case.
Is there more that you want to quote from the immortal Roger Angell?
I interviewed Roger Angell, and his baseball writing was a sidelight for him. It was a hobby, and I think the passion shown in the prose was sort of evident in that because he was the fiction editor of The New Yorker. And I interviewed him in his office at the old New Yorker building. Boy, talk about a visit to Mecca for myself. And he was very considerate and very gentlemanly in his sharing of anecdotes for an hour with me. I mean, he knew the game perfectly, but he also respected it enough to really perform his greatest work related to baseball, which was really a sidelight for him. And of course, credit goes to William Shawn for recognizing that fact and as sort of encouraging him to write more about baseball. I think initially it was maybe the thought he'd do 1 or 2 of these and just sort of, to get off his chest. And it's no. People want more of this. Would you consider doing more of these essays? And each year there'd be 2 or 3. There was always a year-end essay, which was sort of the capping of a baseball season the way the year was capped by his Greetings Friends poem at the end of the year, where he would do a little catch-all. There'd always be a few baseball names in that, too. But the fact he was recognized by the Baseball Writers of America for enshrinement in the Baseball Hall of Fame, he's not a beat reporter. And there's a real clannishness among the writers in that field. Wait a minute, if you weren't writing on a deadline, well, you know what? Roger wasn't writing on a deadline, but his prose was so grand and emblematic of the best of the game, he had to go to Cooperstown.
You're reminding me that the first sort of grown-up writer that I ever read sort of came out of sports. It was Ring Lardner, marvelous short story man, but it began with sports and a book that my father loved called You Know Me, Al, Letters Home from a Rookie to his mom. I think that might be where the line came from, I'll be home soon, Mom, that's starting to throw curves. But anyway, I read Ring Lardner before I read Hemingway. I'm with you on Red Smith and Bill Russell's Second Wind as literature, and Bill Walton on himself somehow. He didn't write the book, but there was the Grateful Dead's #1 fan, a remarkable human being across the board in culture. Past the literature of sports, Richard, what can we say about the very idea of transcendence in sports, getting off the ground conceptually, even spiritually, in this game? Where have we seen it? How do we know it?
Well, I think examples of the transcendence of sports and the overall positive effect of the games we play can be seen readily in an event such as the World Cup, where I don't know whether it was Reuters or one of the other news services actually was able to document this, that when these games are played at any hour of the day across any number of time zones, the weapons are pushed aside, conflicts stop in their tracks because the eyes of the world, the ears of the world are paid attention to the games, that there's a transcendence that is reflected in the decline and the stoppage of conflicts at this time. Would that there be more occasions that this would occur?
That's very basic and true, and I wish the sportscasters made more of it. But the Olympics, to me, are sort of war as sport, but the World Cup is sort of peace as sport. Kylian Mbappe, he's the captain of the French soccer team, is to me a figure of transcendence. And there's the unbelievable skill on the field, but there's something more.
There are examples of people who've come from the neighborhoods we all have inhabited. You know, this isn't royalty, but these are figures that become, in a sense, royalty through their transcendent achievements, through what they've done, not through pedigree or, you know, what university they went to or company they work for. This is based on, you know, pure meritocracy. We can all relate to that. The one I think of a lot, because it was captured in a still image perfectly, Bob Beamon in the '68 Olympics. That broad jump, that record was held for nearly 50 years, if I'm not mistaken. And the picture shows him in midair with an expression on his face where he can't even believe that he's accomplished this. He was doing something no one had ever done before, and it took decades for anyone to even approach it since. It was jaw-dropping. So there are moments like that that only seem to exist in the sporting realm. And there are moments like that in team sports as well. I would certainly hearken to the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, just against all odds. I mean, it's been talked about again and again and again, and it should be. Mike Ruzioni from Winthrop, Massachusetts, the captain of the team, scoring the winning goal against the USSR. Remarkable to this day. It never gets old.
The Miracle on Ice team. And again, miracle, we're flirting with religious language here and religious experience. When I think of the transcendence, I first think of Ted Williams, virtual perfection at bat, and he knew it. He knew it at age 19, and I have a picture of him in his first swings at Fenway Park. About the time he said, all I want is that when I walk down the street, people see me and say, there goes the greatest hitter that ever lived. and he worked at it every day. I also think of Muhammad Ali. I call him the great public intellectual of my lifetime for one simple statement. When he refused the draft, knowing that it would cost him his title as heavyweight champion and maybe put him in jail.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor, hungry people in the mud for big, powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger.
Among the great minds that confronted the awfulness of that war, who said it more simply, that it was out of our range, and more effectively at a greater price to himself than Muhammad Ali? There was a moment in the recent Celtics history that sort of made the point for me. Robert Parrish was talking about Bill Walton. Both had played center for the Celtics, but Parrish was the man. Bill Walton, notorious character, talker, charmer, lived in an apartment in Harvard Square and used to take the Red Line to the Garden on game days. But he had broken every bone in his feet several times. He was frail in a certain way. But late in his career, Red Auerbach had asked him to come back and be there to relieve Robert Parrish, in a sense, 2 minutes a period or something. And this was Parrish telling the story that Walton had come to him and said, Red wants me to sign up again to relieve you from time to time. And what he wanted Robert Parrish to know was that he wouldn't take the job unless it was acceptable to Robert Parrish. And there was love in the doing of it, but there was a love in Robert Parrish's telling of the story, too.
There's a music to sports also. There's an ensemble quality that's, similar to a great jazz ensemble. You could compare the Celtics to Duke Ellington and his comrades, Count Basie. There's a collective that's greater than the individual. It's an example for all of us to follow. And I draw inspiration from that almost on a daily basis.
You mentioned the magic words, ensemble playing, and the Celtics team won championships just 2 years ago. Vincent Cunningham wrote about it in the New Yorker. The ensemble playing, the intuition, the understanding, the respect, the affection, the joy of that team anticipating, it just leapt off that game wherever you were watching it. You mentioned the Ellington Band. I say the Ellington Band was a version of Ralph Waldo Emerson's Concord Circle of the 1850s. Walt Whitman, Thoreau, Melville, Hawthorne, in one town a few miles from here, Rich. What could we say but thank you for it? We're ready, Rich, to go back to the World Cup with a heightened sense. The Scots are in town, and you see the kilts here. They say beer has run out in Boston, but we've touched on important moments, the elements of transcendence, immortality, love, fellowship, striving together and against each other. And we'll watch better for the rest of this season. How does it end, Richard? Do you want to make a prediction?
I'll make a prediction. I'm predicting the United States has a absolutely golden opportunity, and wouldn't that be incredible? It's one sport where we've punched below our weight. Let's start punching above it.
Thank you, Richard Johnson, at the Sports Museum in Boston.
Thank you, Chris.
The thrills and chills of World Cup 26 play on till the end of July. Find your moment to go to radioopensource.org/donate. Give us your own take on sports talk and pitch in to keep the world's first and longest running podcast going strong. We're happy to be founding members of Hub and Spoke, a Boston-based collective of independent voices in podcasting. Check the range of our interests, technology to politics to history and art and sports at hubspokeaudio.org. You'll be glad you did, and thank you.